existing commissioners here.
Yeah.
No, I'm just sitting.
Thank you. Okay, I want to welcome everybody to the January 16th, 2025 meeting of the Seattle Design Commission. Our meetings are being recorded on MS Teams for posting later on our website. For today, from 10 and 12:30, we're scheduled for our third and hopefully final review of the Memorial Stadium project, specifically the Commission's evaluation of the public-facing design components outside of the stadium structure and their integration with Seattle Center. Why don't we have commissioners both in the room and a number of commissioners that are attending virtually. When we do that, we try to make sure that we recognize them as part of the introductions as well as when we do questions and deliberations. So we'll be going back and forth with them online. Why don't we go ahead and start with introductions of commissioners in the room, and commissioners, if you could, your name and any disclosure of any potential conflicts and also your role on the commission. Once we do commissioners in the room, we'll pivot to people online, and then finally we'll have introductions of people attending here in the room today. Do you want to start us off?
Yeah, Zubin Rao, Architecture Commissioner.
Good morning, Molly Spatelnik, Urban Design Commissioner.
Morning, APM Ryan, Urban Planning Commissioner.
Kate, would you like to start introductions?
Sure. Hi, Kate Clark, Art Commissioner.
Then Ben?
You're on mute, Ben.
Ben, you're on mute. There we go.
Oh, Ben Gist, Architect Commissioner.
Thanks, Ben. And Jill?
Hi, Jill Crary, at-large Commissioner and Chair. And I will disclose that when I worked at Seattle Center, I worked on earlier versions of this project. Thank you.
And we are going to be, there are two other commissioners that will be attending online. We'll try to pick them up. We'll try to acknowledge them as they sign in. Brian Markham and Kevin O'Neill, our vice chair. Why don't we start with introductions here, people attending in the room. Brad, I'll start with you.
Great, thank you. If you can hear me, Brad Tom with SOJ, owner representative for Seattle Public Schools.
David Kunzelman, City of Seattle, project manager with Seattle Center.
John Imes, Generator Studio, project manager, managing and leading design effort on this project.
Angie Nygren, architect with Generator Studio.
Barbara Swift with Swift Company Landscape Architects, Urban Designers, site on the project.
Jill Cody with Darklight Design, we're the lighting designers.
We have two other people attending.
My name is Maya McKnight. I'm for the Office of Arts and Culture as a.
Hi, I'm Jackie Kern, and until very recently, I was part of the Seattle Center team, worked on this project for many years.
And we do have, I believe, at least one online attendee.
I think that is that.
Should be Tom Propsel.
Tom, have you joined us? There
Yeah.
you are, Tom.
Good morning, everybody.
I see Brian Markham. Brian, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, good morning, guys. Brian Markham, Engineering Commissioner.
Thanks, Brian. Lance, I see you joined us. Could you introduce yourself?
Yes, Lance Lopes, principal for Memorial Stadium Redevelopment Group.
You're a little choppy, Lance, in what we heard, so.
Okay, let me see if I can make it any better. So Lance Lopes with Memorial Stadium Redevelopment Group. I am the principal in charge for the development.
Thanks, Lance. I think we'll stop there. We'll look and see when Kevin joins us for commissioners. Jill, we'll go ahead and start. If there's any else thing on your end, we'll go ahead and just go to the presentation team to kick us off. Great. David, who's kicking us off today?
Yeah, we'll pull up our presentation here, and then technology permitting, we'll have Lance kick us off.
So I wanted to give everybody a brief update just in terms of the status, and I'm going to turn it over to our partners, David and Brad, to also weigh in on some of their perspectives in terms of what we've accomplished since the last time we met. And generally, we've made really good progress on the design documents. We have now presented our design documents to both Seattle Public Schools and Seattle Center for review and comment. And we will be going over those next week in detail to basically have that DD set, consensus around that DD set, a goal of moving towards construction documents in late April or early May. There has been one hiccup in the schedule. We've always talked about, a sort of groundbreaking in July, and we're still on schedule for that. However, we have determined that there's a major sewer line replacement that runs directly underneath the north grandstand. That is basically a major service line for the city that's over 100 years old and needs to be replaced. So we are currently on hold right now while the city helps us navigate that conversation with the Seattle Public Utilities in terms of exactly what that replacement scenario will look like. But under any circumstance, there will be some delay while that, because of course that has to happen first before we can start any of that construction on that side of the site, which is actually where most of the construction is going to be happening. That north building is where Seattle Center facilities are going to be. It's where a lot of our grandstand structure is. So it couldn't be in a worse location from a development standpoint in terms of interference with the project. So we're going to manage that. We're working through it right now, and we'll continue to forge ahead with the same plan. Perhaps some delay to actually get going on the foundation work. With that, we've continued to, we're excited to show you what we have today. And I'm going to turn over to Brad to talk a little bit more about what the additional engagement will look like with some of the students and teacher groups since we last met. Brad?
Thanks very much. Again, I'm Brad Tong, representing Seattle Public Schools, and I can just say that the leadership of Seattle Public Schools is very, very happy to be at this stage in the project with its partners, the city, and with Memorial Stadium redevelopment. The team has done a great job together in embracing and sort of wrapping arms around what Seattle Public Schools intends to and needs to be doing all the time, with recognizing its engagement and focus on this project being student-centered. With that, we've heard comments from you all the last time about continued engagement, what the engagement's been. And as you're going to see, this first bullet says response to student voice. You're going to see in the presentation the continued evolution of this project that materially you've seen and will continue to see the design team's response to the student voice. And as well, it's important to recognize that moving forward, the continuation, completion of design, construction, and then from day one moving forward, we've got 75 years forward. SPS is 75 years moving forward to envision and make use of the opportunities for education, learning, and placemaking, their spot in the community at this central location, with the flexibility of programs, the programming that's yet to unfold in ways that we can't even imagine, those of us sitting here today. So in terms of celebrating students and fostering pride, that was one of the big themes from the student engagement from years past, going heavily into this summer with stadium design advisory teams, including students in an inclusive way. You're going to see student art and achievement at the concourse displays inside at feature walls, the endless opportunities to feature student achievement and at digital scoreboards and other digital signage. School spirit, look at these word clouds, school spirit celebration of kids. You're going to see that via the zoned lighting in the stadium, at other graphical displays around the project, student-centered content on the graphic signage and building walls. This sort of the inherent location and opportunity of this project really as a common and neutral ground for district-wide activities. Think about all of the neighborhood schools that are school-specific, flag-specific, other than the John Stanford administrative offices. This location represents the only central location across the district as neutral ground, neutral playground. We think that this is really gonna, particularly the opening up of the stadium to Seattle Center and utilizing Seattle Center as the iconic sort of cultural hub of the city. This is gonna showcase student activity and achievement on display to the community through its connectivity at Seattle Center. It's putting SPS on the map, so to speak, and that's a huge, huge opportunity. In terms of the opportunities for education and learning, this will be a training ground, right, for sports medicine at the fields and at the athletic training rooms. It'll be training ground for media broadcasting and press at the press boxes. It'll be a training ground for culinary arts and inherently a training ground for business, marketing, finance, and hospitality. Involve job shadowing, internships, and volunteering at and during stadium operations. This is going to be a fantastic opportunity. There will be flexible classrooms, as you've seen before, for direct instruction. The overlooks at the four corners onto the field as outdoor classrooms is are unprecedented opportunities. Career and technical education, all district career fairs, internships, as I said, job shadowing opportunities from day one of its opening throughout the history or the future of this project is going to be just great opportunities. So SBS sees this as a really great opportunity and has been engaging students through the Stadium Design Advisory Team. We continue to engage students, particularly at the margins, in arts, music, career technical education, focusing on student experience and expanding the student user base. Again, flexible programming, envisioning the future of programming, and all of those touch points continue beyond design. David?
I just wanted to mention, if we go back one slide, while all this exciting work that Brad shared is going on, there's some perhaps less exciting work, maybe very exciting to the attorneys, but we have a set of implementing agreements that are obviously very important to the project. It's the contracts, and these have been moving forward. And once we hit this milestone, end of DD plus cost estimating that is underway, we'll be able to wrap up these documents. And specifically, there's an interlocal agreement that is about the relationship between Seattle Public Schools and the city acting on its behalf as the developer, and then a development agreement where is the agreement between the city and One Roof, which is of course about the design and construction of the project. So we expect those to advance first through the city council and vote through the city council and then to the Seattle Public School Board. So that is the plan that you all see shortly in the press. Thank you. With that, we can go to the next slide. And I just want to reintroduce Maya McKnight, who we're pleased to have be our project manager from the Office of Arts and Culture, and she can talk about it.
Thank you. Yeah, so we are, Office of Arts and Culture is excited to be able to integrate a public art project, public artwork as part of this overall project. We have gone through our selection panel process. We used our public art roster, which includes over 400 artists and individuals nationally. We need a selection panel, which selected Malia Jensen as the artist. On the slide, there's a couple of the dates that we went through, the application review, the interview process, and then the review from the Public Art Advisory Committee for this. We are at the very beginning stages of planning for this project. We actually have our kickoff meeting this afternoon for the artists to come, meet with the project team, learn all about the site, and really kind of deep dive into what potential opportunities there are in this premier location to integrate potentially as part of the overall design, to do a standalone piece. Time will tell, but really just excited to have this on board to be able to add new work to the collection and really be part of the Seattle Center.
And with that, we'll get into our overall project visions, goals, principles. These are slides that we've shared previously, so I'm gonna read through the full list, but just as a reminder, these are our day one project goals. Obviously, a student-first focus, providing a community asset and activation, engaging with the center campus, obviously, DEIA and sustainability targets, creating meaningful partnership opportunities, and finding sustainable development and operating costs wherever possible. And then our project principles, to develop a world-class stadium for Seattle's youth and community, an outside-in design approach, which really focuses on integrating into the Seattle Center context, providing community spaces supported by flexible amenities, celebrating students through art, activation, and technology, and then obviously restoring the memorial wall and providing it a pride of place it does not have today. And then obviously we can't lose sight of the bare minimum here, creating a multifunctional field of play and stadium for the Seattle Public Schools. And throughout the stadium design piece of this, we're going to kind of call back to these goals and principles. So getting into the stadium program and design, we're going to start with the recommendations we received from this group following our October presentation. Wanted to make sure we gave this a close look as we jump into what we're sharing today. So as Brad mentioned, the continued engagement is key for this project. Evaluating feasibility, including public art and infrastructure in the project budget. Study and clearly identify pedestrian, bike, and pedestrian routes. I know Barb's going to show you some exhibits on that today. Continuing the Indigenous engagement. For our corner buildings, consider opening to exterior, evaluating the impact on the center, and consider material choices for friendliness if programming doesn't allow for opening. And then 6, enhancing the community engagement. Again, what Brad touched on with their extensive efforts there. So this is kind of our roadmap of what we'll look at today in terms of the stadium design. We've really isolated today to talk about these areas highlighted and or dashed that are really represent our boundaries of where the stadium meets the Seattle Center campus. So starting with number 1 are our corner pavilion buildings, which have both a public facing side and a stadium facing side. Number 2, our west exterior activations. We have some exciting developments on that end of the project we'll look at. Number 3 is our east exterior activations, which obviously include the memorial wall and entry gates. 4 is our flare entry tunnel, which is kind of tucked away down there on Republican, but we haven't forgotten about it. And number 5, obviously our important Harrison Street activation to the south. So looking at our corner pavilions, the objective here, and we touched on this last time, was really to push these pavilions to the corners of the site so we can maximize the flexibility of our concourse, while also allowing for porosity and activation to the campus, creating these large openings to the east, south, and west. A brief kind of snippet here of our exterior materiality. You see there's not a ton of materials here. We've kept things minimal, simple, and contextual. So looking at these corner pavilions from the campus-facing side, a big development since we last met is these walls we've studied the use of precast concrete, which has an extensive use on campus and a history within the center as being a cost-effective, expressive, and quick to erect and construct technology. And engaging with the campus with that building material and also the expressive nature that the forming of that campus allows for. So a callback to our last presentation where we talked a little bit about our canopy design and the inspiration that they've taken from a larger center context with these expressive sculptural and also functional, in some cases, forms. And so for these precast walls, go to the next. We're taking a similar approach and studying the use of precast throughout the campus, both in structural and expressive ways. Came across this quote from the project engineer from the original World's Fair construction sites, where they really focus on the beauty that's achievable with a simple technology, and that beauty doesn't not have to come at a cost. And I love this quote where they call the architects adequate and the engineers brilliant.
Brian likes
Hard
that.
market.
Yeah.
For sure.
So a little bit of a broader look here, looking kind of zoomed in on our site, but also including climate pledge and larger campus context. We've highlighted in red here the use of one of these precast panel types. That's really a simple system. It's a panelized precast panel with an inset at its exterior face that allows for forms to be created in a very simple, cost-effective way. So we've developed, and this is still somewhat of a placeholder, this pattern that is inspired by, the broader campus, both its natural and built environment, and the sort of spontaneous and regular nature of the campus overall. So this slide's a little bit of a spoiler. We're going to get to this west zone a little bit later, but just want to take a little walk around all four of these pavilion buildings, to give you an idea of that pattern. So this is that northwest corner. This is the southwest corner. This is looking south. You can see obviously Space Needle and the Armory there. This is kind of that very southwest corner looking north up towards that cafe space and that west gate area. We jump to the southeast. Again, the same pattern wrapping around the corner of that building. I think the next slide is kind of a backed up version of this view where you can start to see Harrison Street, that roof canopy, and if you look really closely, Climate Pledge Arena in the background there. And then this is that northeast building, which is actually a pretty modest little building, a little ticket window and some services on the inside of the concourse. And so the interior faces of these pavilions take on a completely different life. And this is where we did touch on last time, where we are looking to provide these full-scale art walls for students to have representation and expression opportunities, celebrating those students through art, activation, and technology. Again, a project goal. These spaces would flank our community spaces that are at each of these four corners and meant to be flexible amenities. Again, I think we looked at this last time. This was a stadium we recently completed back home in Kansas City, where we had these large-scale murals developed in concession areas. So the mechanical application of that was a vinyl graphic that can be applied to really most any exterior building material. But looking at other applications, this is kind of a collage of some what I would call art walls in back home in Kansas City, a few from here. And I think across the country, we're starting to see a lot of this application of large scale art on surfaces that weren't really intended for that, but they do take on their own life. What we're talking about here is a day one application of this type of graphic and art. So just a little bit about the process and a view and sort of example of the scale of these art walls, and just a brief diagram here talking about the process that we see this taking on, which is still in development, early stages, but it puts SPS at the center of that process, whether these are purely student created pieces or collaborations with artists is to be determined. We're going to jump to the west exterior activations, and I've included here some of those recommendations from October. And the big ones that we address at this corner of the project are listed here. The big ones being the feasibility of including public art into the project and considering opening to the exterior with these corner buildings. And we talked a bit about it already, but the cafe at the very north end of this building is a new activation that would be not operated by the stadium. It would be operated by a third party. But we see that as a great opportunity at that corner to really engage with the campus facing out toward the international lawn. We also have restroom entries to this building. You can sort of see here highlighted in red. And then we have a large entry gate along this west concourse that would be really more focused for community events. The SPS gates that will be used are along the east, which is how they operate the stadium today, and that'll remain. And then we have south of that, you can kind of see a red line there, a section of fencing that we're looking at a custom patterned application that we see as a art opportunity for an installation, potentially through an indigenous group here in Seattle. So we'll look at each of those pieces here. This is that west entry. Kept this gate structure pretty simple. It sort of is an extension more of the fence line, that entry gate, than it is the architecture. Giving a little coverage for staff that's operating these gates and for queuing. You can see here too, we've identified a location for a donor wall that's just adjacent to this entry. This is that fence panel installation opportunity I mentioned. It's a bit of a tricky corner here because of the site grading. Where we're standing in this view, we're about 7 feet above the concourse elevation. So with this fence, we want to have, roughly a 50% opacity so that you're not getting what SPS would call a cheapskate view into the facility, but you're able to have a sense that there's an event happening and it's an active site on campus. Another look at that cafe space. We'll have a couple of views here. It's obviously looking north. And then a view from that cafe, sort of patio area looking out into that lawn and international fountain. And then we jump to the east side of the site, where just a couple of tweaks really on this side of the project that, again, call back to some of the SDC recommendations and our project goals of giving Memorial Stadium a good pride of place. We've slightly shifted. So the two plans on the left, the upper plan is a previous layout, lower left is the updated layout where we've shifted those entry gates away from the wall to give it a nice moment to itself. And so this is a look at that northeast entry gate. Again, a similar gate structure to what we saw on the west, having a cohesive language, these elements, and as a simple wayfinding element, it's key. And then the southeast, again, a similar minimal gate structure that steps away from the memorial wall and is adjacent to the ticketing window. And just a brief mention of the memorial wall itself. I know Barb's going to look at this a little bit later. Just a view showing that we have kind of cleared out space on both sides to really let it stand apart and have its own moment here. And then our northeast field entry tunnel. This is down at field level off of Republican Street. Today, it's not a very glorious moment for students as they arrive to the stadium, but we're hoping to improve upon that. And so this is a look at the approach to that corner, getting a little closer, and then a look at the actual tunnel, which has now been actually sized for a pedestrian scale. It will no longer be a vehicular traffic tunnel. So it's able to be scaled down and then allow for this kind of large signage and branding moment for the stadium itself to happen above. And then just a view after dark for those Friday night light events. And then just a brief slide here on the Harrison Street canopy. Obviously, this is an important moment for the stadium design where it bridges that gap into the campus, providing that community space. And a 3D look here, again, kind of after dark. We are working through some cost challenges on our lighting strategies for the site lighting, as Joe will get into a little bit here today. But the idea is that these canopies will be lit as features of the project.
Okay. So we'll talk a little bit about sustainability. As John mentioned in the project vision, sustainability has been one of our priorities on this project. As designers, obviously with the changing environment, it's important to us, but it's very interesting to hear the students and our student engagement. That's something that's very important to them as well. And so our previous presentations, we've had very conceptual ideas of how we'd achieve a sustainable design. And now we're to the point in our design process where we actually have requirements that we need to meet in order to meet code and in order to meet our LEED Silver goals. So this list is just a snip of some of the credits we're going for, but we do have two separate parameters to meet. We have to meet the 2021 Seattle Energy Code and LEED Silver. And so sometimes the credits overlap a little bit. Sometimes they're totally different rating systems, but just some of the notable credits: we are reducing our lighting power. We've got renewable energy in the form of solar panels on our north roof. We've got about 35 kVA of solar on our north roof. Enhanced envelope performance. So this is just making sure that our exterior perimeter is sealed up tight and has enhanced insulation so that there's no leakage from interior to exterior. LEED Silver, some of the credits we're achieving is just obviously because of the site is such a primo location. We've got surrounding density and transit. Heat island reduction thanks to some of Barb's landscaping beds and our high reflective roof. We're getting outdoor water use reduction, and this ties back to kind of our initial goal of putting the canopy drainage into our planting beds. We've got optimized energy performance, and obviously waste management is huge on the construction side. So those are some of our conceptual ideas are now translated into actual design elements. And and we're continuing to find ways to meet the code and LEED silver.
It's not
If
working.
you like, you can, if you want, you can use the down button.
Sweet, thank you. Okay, we are gonna jump into the site portion of this. Oops, down. There we go. Just as a reminder, I find this rather helpful. The heavy dashed line illustrates where the fence line is, or the wall line is, excuse me. And the gray indicates the extent of the new development, including the pavilion buildings and the fence line. So again, we thought that was an important thing to touch on quickly. You can see there is area which is really coming back for use for a broader community than currently is the case. You had asked us to talk a little bit about pedestrian and bike access to the stadium coming from the monorail and also from Harrison. And we've done a little enlargement here. I think one of the things about Seattle Center is it has these significant pathways which are not segregated by use type. And so coming from the monorail and also Harrison, the widths of those vary, but they go probably about 20 to upwards of 40 and sometimes a little bit larger. So I think with the exception of when there's a major festival, free flow is available. You also asked us to continue to work with Seattle Center on the issue of site programming and also with the school district associated with that as well. We've gone through a process of really cross-checking the design against this array of activities. And so we have a game day condition with a variety of things like food trucks, queuing areas, etc. We have school events, whether it's a classroom or a presentation or performance, some of the things that Brad reflected on. Seattle Center festivals, this really used the Bite of Seattle as the basis for looking at this. And with this particular study and layout, we're exceeding that current level of tents. Now, we are going to be meeting again with Seattle Center Event Group on the 23rd to cycle through that. And obviously these diagrams are a high level. They have been testing siting, etc. Large events, this could be a beer garden or an event with a stage for 250. Private events, this could be a small gathering. It could be the use of the site for fitness. It could be a presentation of some kind. And we've also been keeping track of vehicular movement through the site to just make sure that this is going to work well in the future and meet the demands. I do want to note that there are 3 small areas where we are shifting pedestrian pavement to increase it in support of event use and vehicular access. So there are just some slight shifts occurring on this. So here's a site plan. And then I want to walk you down through the 3rd Avenue Promenade. That was has been asked as a question, and I think it's really quite interesting. So this sequence goes north, starting at Thomas. The configuration of this experience between Thomas and Harrison is one of a strong alley of trees, and it terminates at this interesting junction where Harrison meets 3rd. And here we have this incredible signature tree that owns pride of place right there in the center of the axis. And then to the left, the alignments of trees begin to dissolve into a grove condition. This is going to take us into a sequence of before and after. So again, that signature tree in the center there. And on the right, in the existing image, is another really beautiful, mature locust that is set into the vegetation. We're going to be preserving that. And then you can see in the image on the right, this area really opens up much of the understory is going away. It's going to be a relatively low ground plane position. So you, as you walk up, really can do a broad scan and select your path through. It really changes the relationship, I think, to some degree with the fountain, really bringing it in. Now, this is if you were continuing down what is going to be an arced Third Avenue promenade. So to the west of the current covered walkway. And again, the extension of the fountain lawn rolls down toward the stadium entry plaza. This descends down the slope at approximately about a 4.5–5% slope and lands us at the intersection of August Wilson Way and that arced wall and arced trench drain of Crossheimer Plaza come out. And so there is a call and response between the arc wall of Crossheimer Plaza and the one that we're proposing. So we really have almost two experiential characteristics in terms of lengths. One, which is the strong LA on between Thomas and Harrison. The second is between Harrison and August Wilson Way, which is really more of a landscape experience where the walkway is set into the rolling plain of the International Fountain. And then we get to that, we have two knuckles, one at August Wilson Way and one at Harrison. Okay, we are going to go to a video. Can you take me to a video?
So we all hold our breath.
Oh my God. So we did a fly through last time and found it really helpful. And before we go into the details of this, we wanted to do another one. So this is reflects the changes. We're starting in the northeast, walking to the south along what will be a community walk. You can see the Space Needle in the distance. We're coming up upon the memorial wall. We're going to rotate out. We were able to take and create a plaza in front of the memorial wall by deleting some parking. And again, the grade change between the outside and the inside is roughly 4 feet. So when you're standing out in that plaza, you're going to feel a physical connection to the concourse. It's a really different circumstance. So we're continuing to the south. As John said, the entries have shifted, so they're more proportionally arranged around the memorial. You can see seating steps. And this is kind of squished east and west, you guys, for some reason. So you're continuing to walk toward Harrison. And again, we have trees creating a separation between parking and the walkway. And now we're going to come to Harrison and do a rotation and begin to go down the Harrison corridor. And this sets you up for long views down that corridor of Climate Pledge Arena. And so we have a corridor which is treed for sort of entry movement and then and vehicular movement. And then we have this area adjacent to the fence line, which again is set up for activities that support inside the stadium as well as outside with lots of seating. You can begin to see some bands of pavement. We'll talk about that later. We're going to be doing a sequence of rain gardens in this planting area. And then there are a group of rosebuds. You're going to see an image of this later. We're going to be extending that line out so that Harrison has that as an identifying characteristic. So there you see a food truck. And again, you guys, for some reason, the proportionality of this is a little weird. It's narrower than it actually is. I'm not sure what happened with this. At both ends of this Harrison gathering area, we have these garden spaces that are transitions. For example, we're beginning to go down one of those and it's heading you toward the fountain. You can see vines on the fences. They vary in extent throughout the project. And we're coming up on that southwest corner pavilion that holds that corner. And what happens here is currently as you walk toward the fountain, it's really almost a straight linear condition. We're opening that up, and I talked about the ability to see through the ground plane as you come down Third. The same thing is here as well, but really you end up with almost a walk which is online with the center of the fountain. It really brings that through to you, and you begin to see here a change in the pavement to a darker gray. We're saving all of the existing paving around the fountain and reusing it to sort of bring it down Harrison to extend that sense of the fountain district. So we're moving toward that, and we're going to begin to go down the Third Avenue Arc Promenade. There's grass on the right, and as John said, it is elevated, and that was part of those early conversations with you about making sure that that sense of the fountain district extended to the toward the stadium. So we're dropping down the grade. The grade change varies along here, and it begins to come down to be almost at the same elevation as the entry plaza, and then drops below. But at August Wilson Way, it's about 2.5 to 3 feet lower than that entry plaza. So you still feel, again, as if you're part of this larger area. So now we're getting to the knuckle at August Wilson Way. August Wilson Way right now feels like a group of corridors that intersect at this location. And with the cafe and the seating and creating a little bit more breathing space, keeping all of those large legacy trees, it really turns it into a gathering space. So it's a knuckle now. So now we're going up that sloped walk, and you can see the lawn area on the right that is going to be used for event staging. And this takes us into a smaller area that could be used for smaller events, and really, if needed, if you're doing a beer event, you could cordon it off to the entry at the stadium. And then the steps that lead you up to that elevated grass plain. And again, those are used as stadium seating, amphitheater seating, as well as a step. And then we're going to go north. We have inserted a whole series of seating up against this edge. And what it's trying to do is really do another layer of seating that's related to the fountain, that views the lawn in case there are events, etc., but sort of supports and expands that sense of the fountain district. So now we're coming back up to that intersection, and we're going to do a rotation, looking back down Harrison. Then we're going to roll around and come back toward Climate Pledge and the fountain. And you can see the extent in pale gray of those pavers. This now does an elevation, so you can begin to see the whole thing together. So there we go. Why don't we try and go back to the slides? But thank you very much. Yeah. Appreciate it. Maybe keeps going. Okay, we're going to start in the Northwest. And I've already talked about much of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through a series of before and after images. So if you were on the concourse, this is what you would see before and after. Really, the lightness of that canopy, the ability to see underneath it, really changes your sense of views of those major landmarks. I've talked at some length about this, but I really think if you look at the image on the left versus the right, this is really beginning to calm down. All of the elements are there, claim back space, make it attractive and usable and engaging, and invite people to use it. Again, with the covered canopy gone, And opening up that space with a connection to the fountain, this changes significantly. In the southwest corner, I'm going to walk you through again some more before and afters. I think again, if you are at the fountain looking toward the stadium, right now you have the covered canopy, you have the wall, the trees, which really constitute a barrier, and that's going to be all opened up. And that the plane of the fountain extends toward the east. This is looking back toward the north, down the area where there'll be all of the seating in that large gathering and lawn area. If we go to the south site plan, I'm going to, again, take you through some before and after. We talked a bit about this, the change in the view and access to the fountain. Again, the vegetation on the right is, in terms of the density of it, is going to be going away, and that whole aperture opening up so you can see through to the fountain. I think this view walking down from the monorail, this is a real game changer. I don't even know if I need to say anything about this. This is incredible. This is just incredible. This is really exciting. And then I think importantly, Harrison is one of the things that extends the sense of Seattle Center out to the east, really enhancing that corridor in terms of the clarity of both use and also the introduction of layers of activity. And tree canopy is really going to change the experience. So here we have the corner building that John talked about at the Blades. Again, things are going to calm down here, and that sense of entering the campus is going to really be more positive and occur earlier. So I'm going to go into the east side. John talked a lot about some of the changes, and we may get really quite quickly to the issue of the memorial. But we've already seen many of these images. Again, I think this is really pulling the quality and the generosity of Seattle Center east, framing that parking lot. Here we have a memorial. And then at the very north, that staircase on the very far right goes down to Republican, connecting north to Queen Anne. I want to touch on materials. Starting at the bottom of the image, coming up, what we are doing is we are using the salvaged pavers, and then we are using concrete treated in a variety of ways. So scoring to be able to shift the color of concrete, sandblasting, saw cut joints that result in a clean finish, and then the introduction of mica in selective places. We are bringing in a whole sequence of benches, which wood and backs for everybody who needs to use this, obviously bike racks. And then we are using planting in a way where we are accentuating the seasonal change and the motion of plants, the increased characteristics of texture and pattern, so that this has a sense of scale to it throughout the season. So early flowering plants and trees. There you see the pink, that's the rosebud. Those are currently on the site. We have a beautiful clear yellow leaf in the fall. We are using predominantly deciduous vines. So those again come and go. So you have the sense of transparency and opacity over the seasons. Selecting ground cover for its effectiveness and ability to grapple with harsh conditions, and a significant community of rats, as well as this is
No need
life.
to repeat that.
This is urban life.
They have to be.
Just
Yeah, we
cleaned
gotta-
up later.
This is part of our community. As well as the approach to using trees is to introduce what I would call structural diversity. Tall, medium, and low, and with that, you get habitat enhancement in this particular area, which is critical in terms of the health of the larger city. So that gives you a sense of the range of materials that we're using. And then let's come to the memorial site plan. Yesterday, at the end of the day, we had a meeting with Landmarks, and it was resulted in enthusiastic support. Our next meeting with them is going to go for the certificate of approval, and so that was really quite exciting. But I want to describe some of the things that we are doing. ADA access throughout here, universal access is consistent and up to the fountains and the memorial wall. That's essential. That's been a guiding force. The two fountains on the ends are being reactivated. As you can imagine, that's an interesting group of conversations. The wall itself, we thought there was a fountain there, but we've realized with more research, it was just a place for lighting, so the wall will be lit. And then I think what's important is the section in the lower left-hand corner, which illustrates the grading approach, which is being able to really walk right up to the wall. The letters are in the Wilkinson sandstone. They're probably about 3/8 of an inch deep. They're subtle, but this allows you to get right up to the wall itself. So I think that's it. I'm gonna pass it to you. And you wanna change places here? Let's do that.
All right, so I think, what we're gonna do is talk, some of this might be a little bit of a repeat from our October meeting, but I think I wanted to just sort of restate some of these things because they are really the framework that we're trying to run this design basically through the lens of lighting. And so a lot of these things, obviously, our number one job is to reinforce and we're working within those project principles that John mentioned. And our drivers here are, obviously just designing the lighting so that the stadium integrates perfectly within the greater context of Seattle Center. And then also providing flexibility for both event and non-event conditions. I think Barb showed some of those layouts that we were looking at in terms of potential events. And so we're just making sure that we support those. And then also in non-event conditions, some of those open views that we've been talking about, we really want to make sure that those are reinforced even when there isn't activity inside of the stadium. For us, we think that lighting has a pretty big role to play in terms of creating a legible wayfinding after dark. And so we'll talk a little bit about how we're planning to do that. And then also supporting placemaking through just creating really comfortable spaces for people to gather that are supporting those other elements that we have in terms of gathering, with benches and things like that. And then the number one thing that everybody asks us about, we know is our number one job, is just enhancing those feelings of safety and security so people can be confident in how they move around campus. So, the stadium obviously holds a pretty prominent spot here on the campus. And then, within that larger context, you can see that how lighting starts to play a part just in sort of creating these spaces and landmarks for the city across campus through lighting. And for us, we really think about, spaces always exist in the context of how people experience them during the day and then how they do after dark. And so that's especially true here. You can see sort of these different experiences, and we think that's actually great, when people walk through. And at this point, we were out there on campus a few weeks ago. It was about 5 and it was already dark. So this is not necessarily a late night type of thing from the experiential standpoint. So what, our goals are to just, you can see here that a lot of these lighting contexts start to just create depth around the campus and highlight things differently than you might see them during the day under the sort of like broad swath of daylight. So we will definitely be working to follow in that context. One thing I guess I want to point out is that lighting really does help define the bounds of space after dark. And so, you know, one of the things that we're really mindful about is that having light on vertical surfaces, which you can see a lot of that in this imagery, is really important to people as they experience space, because if there isn't a lit something, you know, in the distance, that it can really start to feel like darkness closes down on you. And this image, and I'll just say the trick for lighting designers is people say all the time, can you show me what a foot candle looks like? And the answer is no. It's really hard to capture. Phone cameras love to brighten things up beyond where they are. So we actually did bring the brightness on this down to approximate what we think the experience feels like. But obviously this is a little snip. You know, when you're out there, this is, you know, there's the surround and things like that. But this is a shot of Harrison at 3rd, basically looking to the east. So the armory would be on your right in this image. And there's a little red blob down there, which is like where we've measured a certain light level. There's 0.38 foot candles. This is a pretty typical context for walkways on campus. And, you know, generally people feel comfortable. There's a few spots where a fixture, there's a tree in front of fixture, there's you know, a fixture's out or something like that. But in general, it feels safe because part of that has to do with lighting, but part of that also has to do with the general openness of the campus. And one of the exciting things about this project is in this particular spot right here, your boundary is the dark wall and unlit vegetation that is on the north side of Harrison. So this idea of really opening things up is going to be really important, and we just want to support those views through with light. And the canopies are going to play a really large part in this. You know, we, as John mentioned, we're sort of working through the hows and wherefores of how we're going to light these canopies. I think the question of color is something we're definitely is a really high priority for the design team and for all the stakeholders. So we're working really hard on figuring out how to make that happen. But what we think is important about it, and you can see in this view that if you imagine, this is a nice daylight shot, but if you imagine everything that would not be lit as being dark, that would just be really detrimental to the experience. So we are really, as I mentioned, prioritizing that, both for the experience inside and obviously outside the stadium. So as we're outside, and I'm sorry, this is projecting a little bit light, but one of the things that we're looking at is just defining different circulation typologies, and Barb talked a lot about that, supporting that through the fixture selection and scale and light quality. And when we talk about light quality, that generally for us means kind of like, does the fixture glow itself so that you see sort of that light source, or is it more shielded so that just the effect of the light is there? The 3rd fixture over from the left is the campus standard for pedestrian pathways. It does have kind of that luminous glow quality. Where we have sort of larger space like the West Plaza, we're looking at a larger scale fixture just to kind of those areas. And then where we have vertical transitions like stairs or ramps, we will have some light integrated into our handrails. And so this kind of plays that out generally. What you can see is the magenta dots are that campus standard pole that currently defines Harrison and defines that what I would call the overlaid street grid type of circulation. What we're looking at on the east and the west is going to more of that shielded light source, because on the east side, we really want the memorial wall to be the focus instead of these bright little dots, which are very helpful, you know, across campus and helping you really understand and make clear where those other circulation pathways are. And then on the west, again, looking for something more shielded, because what we're really trying to do is not have the buffer between the west side of the stadium and the fountain be, again, about the light fixture itself. So we're really looking at something that's shielded. There is context for this on campus at the Arena Plaza. It's a similar type of strategy that's that's used there. And then for the memorial wall, I think for us, we're just really excited to have some, be able to install lighting that's not been functional, we think, since about a couple years after it was originally installed. So to just support that placemaking and that presence that we're looking at with that new plaza. And then with the water features being restored, then also providing lighting for those that will also kind of fill those fluted reveals on each side. And that's what we've done.
Thank you. Okay.
Oh, wow.
I want to just, I mean, we have, obviously, Maya and Jackie introduced themselves. We don't have any other members of the public or members of the public in the room. I'm looking online and it looks like most of the people who were attending online are associated with the project or city staff that are tracking the project. I just wanted, for those who are attending online, if you could raise your hand if you're interested in providing up to 2 minutes of public comment, and that would include anyone from any of the city agencies or other agencies attending. What we'll do, I think, is to, I've made the call. If you raise your hand, we'll go ahead and start with commissioner questions, and then we'll pivot back if we do see anyone who raises their hand, who are attending online that want to comment. Do you, just acknowledging Kate's having to leave at noon, we could go ahead and start with commissioners who are attending online, if that works.
Great, yeah.
Kate, do you want to kick us off, and then we'll follow up with Ben, Brian, and Jill?
Yeah, and I can stay a little bit after noon. And
Okay.
thank you all for the presentation. It's really exciting to be with you along this whole process and see the project evolve. It's just wonderful to witness the evolution and development of it. And I just had a couple quick questions. There was some discussion about, and correct me if I'm wrong, a cast concrete treatment for the corner building wall surface treatments. Is that correct? And could you tell us a little bit more about the concept and design motivations and references for that?
Could you maybe put up the site plan, and we can start for that for orienting comments and pivot if we need to.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so these walls, if you recall in our previous presentation, we began the project looking at these as pretty modest CMU construction pavilion buildings. And through the design process and comments from this group and others, realized that the precast material used on campus is pretty extensive, and that the reasons they use it then are the same reasons we can use it now, is that it's a cost-effective way of creating a materiality and an expression that looks more expensive than it is. And so what we're looking at is instead of a double-withed CMU with insulation, this is a cavity. It's two concrete pours essentially with an insulated cavity between as one unit that gets assembled sort of like Lego blocks. And it's so cost effective. It's actually for our construction partners a cost neutral design change. So we think it does a lot for us, and it's a good opportunity for us to be a little more expressive with these pavilion buildings and give them a character that's tough to achieve with a CMU construction type. The pattern itself is something I think I mentioned still under development. What we're showing today is a direction that we were liking, but we are still working through the process with our stakeholders, user groups, to get feedback on the pattern itself.
Could you broadly speak to what the pattern represents, or what its imagery connects to?
Yeah, I think it's similar to our canopy structures in the use of the parabolic curve as an expressive element. It sort of plays with the idea of these masses and void spaces where what you see in white would be recessed into the concrete. And so you'd end up with this pattern as a color and also as a bit of a shadow line as it sort of plays around each of these corner buildings as a cohesive language that even wraps around, you may have noticed, to that northeast player entry tunnel. And so it's, to us, it's a good opportunity to give the stadium an overall brand, if you will, as part of the signage, wayfinding, and just overall character of the new stadium.
Great. Thanks for that background info. I appreciate it. A couple more questions for the team. This is for a question about the interior artwork at the stadium. Exciting that you're mentioning, building meaningful partnerships around this project. Just a couple clarifying questions. Will you all be working with a lead artist that will be helping to coordinate those collaborations amongst the students from all the various schools? And then just to confirm, are those artworks being funded by SPS?
I think,
Go ahead.
I'll kick us off and then defer to Brad, but we're really still kind of early stages in assembling the process that would create the artwork and establish the authorship of those pieces. But the aspiration is that they would be either a collaboration with student body or student work itself that is shown there as a reflection and acknowledgement of the SPS community.
That's exactly right. And speaking for SPS, I think it's an exciting pivotal point right here, right now, where the design settles down with the agency and permitting and other, approvals. The opportunities that we've been citing here, when they start to gel, go hand in hand with this process of engaging between the developer, the designers, and architects, and SPS program leadership in terms of devising the right, whether it's competition-based or non-competition-based invitations through the arts leadership there, those programs, creating the right mechanism and process for making sure that we do invite the right not genres, but the right mediums of student art in and where the architecture deliberately presents itself. So we need to take the lead from the design first, make sure that we are set with what opportunities there are, because student programs like that really respond best to, here's the formula, here are the locations, this is what programs there are to actually respond in kind, rather than having the student programs dictate, like competitive programs dictate what the design ought to be. It needs to be the other way around, and we've fashioned it that way. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, Katie, I'd like to jump in here too and just answer one other part of your question, which is the funds will come from the project itself. The better question that we'll ask ourselves, at what point will we potentially consider renovations or, on a sort of a cyclical basis or not. We still haven't determined that, but the initial, at least, funds for the design and the installation will come from the project.
Thanks for that. I appreciate it. Just two more quick questions. This is a question for the lighting team. Will there be potential consideration of inclusion of lighting the artworks that are being funded through the Percent for Art?
I think so, since it's so fresh, we haven't really, I think that that's a conversation that's gonna go on as the art, develops in terms of like even where it's cited, and what sort of medium it is. I will say that there is a lot, if you're familiar with campus, there's a lot of art on Seattle Center campus. Some of it's lit and some of it isn't, but it's really, from our standpoint, it would just be, speak to, what we can do, or honestly, whether we should or not.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And then one last question, if there mention of collaboration or inclusion, invitation of working with Indigenous artists, could you talk a little bit more about your consideration of that process?
Yeah, and really where we're focused on potential opportunity for that engagement is that section of fencing at the west, a custom pattern design. Lance, I don't know if you want to touch on that. I think it's sort of now being discussed as an intent to engage with an Indigenous group to essentially hand that over as a canvas to a group to take on as an opportunity for representation in the project.
Yeah, John, I think that's right. In other words, I think first and foremost, we have to develop the opportunities and locations for them to start to think about. But the tricky part, and we are using pyramid communication to help navigate what I'll call the politics of the various Indigenous groups, because as many of you know, they are not all one and the same. They don't see everything the same way, and they don't want to express their tribal heritage necessarily in the same way. So with that, it creates a sometimes difficult, but I would say at least tricky way to do this. So whether it's giving them each a separate panel, or those are the issues we have not yet sort of figured out how to use when we approach them. But somehow we're, with the guidance of our consultant, we will try to figure out how to best navigate the complexity, if you will, of it, because it's not one thing, right? And we can't simply hand the keys to one and tell the others that they can't participate. But at the same time, we also want it to be, you want it to read in a way that's not dog's breakfast, for lack of a better term. So this is definitely it's like maybe we're holding this off because it is complex, but it's one that we need to do more work on. We're just not all the way there yet, but I think we have identified some of the area for sure, which is a big first step for us, is to say, okay, if you guys want the quote unquote canvas, perhaps this might be a nice place to think about.
Great, thanks so much. Those are my questions.
Excuse me, Ben.
Yeah, I just wanted to compliment you guys on the evolution of the project. I think it looks great. I really appreciate the landscape and the hierarchy of the trees, and also the attention to the memorial adjacent to the parking lot. So I think it's all good stuff. I just have one question. With the precast material, and apologies if you said something about this, but the precast material, is there any concern for graffiti or how that could be treated if it does get tagged? And I have a little bit of experience with that. It's hard to get it off. So I just don't know if there's a graffiti coating, or if it's not really an issue there, or if there's any concern or thought to that. But anyway, and I'll be silent after this, and thank you. I think it really looks really lovely.
David?
I'm excited.
David, I think you might be best positioned to maybe address what I'll call the campus. I mean, I think you probably have the best perspective in terms of what you've experienced today.
Yeah, I'll just say it's a strong concern, of course, anywhere on campus. And I'm knocking on a wood veneer table to say that our precast that we do have on campus has been well respected by taggers, and meaning that we have not had the same level of occurrences on the precast that we have on other surfaces. And you can all opine on why that might be, but that has been the reality. But it is of course, a high concern.
And from a technical aspect, we have spec anti-graffiti coating in our precast. Not that that's gonna prevent graffiti, but we have that in our specs.
If it works here, though, we might have to say that good design just is a natural anti-graffiti
Yeah.
strategy.
Yeah, it must be the engineers.
It's definitely-
To your earlier quote.
Thanks, Ben. Brian, speaking of engineers, Brian?
I was just in Google Maps looking at the KEXP precast, so I appreciate it. And if you are looking for sort of what they're planning, Kate, I think I would do the same. That north wall of KEXP is very similar. I think evolution is a great word. I'm really excited to see this. I do rather enjoy sort of the discrete, smaller buildings, and that it's not going to be a big wall of precast. And I think we should be really happy with that. The smaller chunks of buildings really do help keep it seemingly very natural and part of the campus, and I really appreciate that, the design for that point. There was one slide at the very beginning in the public art slide that I think was an outdated render, and it seemed very different from the rest of the presentation. So I just wanted to figure out where that, like, where is this? That's the player entrance, right?
This is, the northeast player entry tunnel down on Republican.
Yeah, the player entrance. This seemed like much larger buildings than I was expecting, but in that one corner, I think it is appropriate, right? I think that was my only question. I rather enjoy sort of the angularity of the buildings now. And I just, as you solidify, I would even look at the main canopy and that big long sweeping curve as to whether that needs to stay curved or not. But that's up to the designer as an aesthetic choice. And I will be very happy with the stadium as currently shown. So I cede my time.
Thanks, Brian. Jill?
Thanks. I'm really excited to see this, and it's really evolved nicely. I'm gonna ask Kate to jump in if I get into some things that she wants to add more to, because she and I both are on the Public Arts Advisory Committee, and we've talked about this project there multiple times. So you just had the slide up that had the $275,000 budget. When we first saw that, I think at the PAC, my memory was it was a $250,000 budget. And we asked a lot of questions about how 1% for art of a $40 million city contribution ended up with only $250,000 for the art. And one of the things we learned was that the arts office had a certain overhead rate. And so Kate and I, with some other people on this committee, pushed on them to lower their overhead rate, which they did, which I think is what brought it to 275. We also learned that Seattle Center hadn't turned over the full 1% amount for various reasons. And so, David, I feel obligated that if we're going to push on the arts office, we need to also ask Seattle Center if they couldn't find a way, given the importance of this project and the fact that, the 1% contribution is only on the city portion. So proportionally to the whole project, it's somewhat small. If there isn't some way Seattle Center couldn't find a way to chip in the full 1% amount rather than withholding some of it.
I can certainly take those comments back. I will say that the 1% is based on the amount that's going into this project. So that is a full 1%. And that's currently on the 35 million. The balance of that is paying for other hard costs that Seattle Center has, including the art, and other structural changes that are going to be happening on campus as a result of this project. So there are a number of entities that are items that are displaced as part of this project that need to be recreated elsewhere, and we haven't yet gotten to a point where we're able to identify those. But a greenhouse is an example. A number of elements that were once stored in the north building will not be able to be stored there. The well-loved TerraPlast, those big plastic sheets, for example, that go down under festivals. There's a lot of exterior things that will need to be either have something built or have something changed in the existing buildings, which is more likely. So that's what those balances are currently. And nonetheless, I will share the comment, Joe.
And I appreciate that, David. And I know that if those things were separate CIP line items, they would not be arts eligible. But when they're lumped into an entire project that's arts eligible, I hope you can think a little bit differently about that. You know, there's a plaque in McCaw Hall that says, public money makes it possible, private money makes it spectacular, or something similar. And I've been reminded of that as we've been working on this project. And I think that that's part of where the impulse to ask everyone to dig deep, you know, is coming from, because what was originally a let's just freshen up the stadium is now a spectacular project. And so it would really be great if the art could be as well. And then Lance, you and I had talked about potentially a one roof contribution too. I'm kind of assuming some of these things that you've talked about are that, or could be that.
Lance, you're on mute.
Sorry, Jill. Yeah, I would say at this point in time, we're still working through our budget. You know, as I mentioned, we're at the DD stage, so we're trying to figure out what sort of contingency and funds we may have at the end. But we have not ruled out the ability to, I would say, add at the end with some excess funds. But we don't want to put it into the design phase instead, simply because we're starting to see our costs escalate pretty dramatically right now across a number of different fronts. And so unfortunately, we just can't commit yet. We're not saying no, we're just saying let's wait and see if there's some funds left over where we can, to your point, really add some sizzle at the end to do some really cool things. But that's our goal.
Right, but I mean, it sounds like you've added the potential indigenous piece to you've accepted that as part of the project budget.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, you know, obviously there will be the art on the inside, which would not be, you know, not necessarily artist generated, but would be student generated. But, you know, and our hope is that the stadium itself is sort of, you know, has some, I mean, even these walls that we've talked about, hopefully we've taken them from to John's point, CMU walls to something where people are actually feeling like they've inspired something a little bit better than just the back of the restroom. So, you know, we're trying to make those advances that you've all recognized today, and we appreciate that.
Great. And then I also assume that you'll build on your history of your artist selection process for the arena. Should you fund any art?
Yeah, we would. If we went that way, Jill, we would absolutely go through what I would call some of the city-led processes. We know enough to know that that's not what we do. We're better at probably funding than we are at selecting and managing those processes. So we know where our skills lie.
Great. Thank you, Lance. So when I first opened this package to look at it, and I saw the treatment that Lance was just mentioning on those walls, it looked like it was very much and what you reference, you call them the KXP walls or the Paul Theory walls from the original World's Fair design. And I have a long history with the Paul Theory legacy at Seattle Center and the groupies and disciples of Paul Theory. And I think if you're going to stick with something that so clearly says, I'm inspired by Paul Theory, but yet I'm breaking all the rules that Paul Theory followed, I think that there's a lot more stakeholder work you're going to have to do to make that palatable. One thing to do would be just not do it, which would be a way to take these very interesting shapes you have and have them be interesting in a way that doesn't echo Paul Theory. But the theory panels on the Northwest rooms were shapes that reinforced the very vertical nature and rhythm of all those structures, including the panels, including the colonnades, including the glass that faces the upper courtyard and faces on the Alki room, which is where SIF is, faces the fountain. And you're breaking that vertical. So it's reverential and not at the same time. And I personally don't have a aesthetic opinion about it. I just have a process warning to you that you're going to need to talk to the Landmarks Board. You're going to need to talk to Doko Momo. You're going to need to talk to the Queen Anne Community Council, or I think you're going to have more. I think you're inviting a certain amount of trouble where you don't really need to have any trouble, because you've done a wonderful, fantastic job on this project. So that's just a caution question I have. Have you talked to any of those groups, or have you thought about talking to any of them?
Jill, the answer is no, because we've tried, at least maybe we failed, but our goal was to stay away from and you've noticed today, we never mentioned the theory.
Yeah, no, I know.
It was others who chose to do that. So we have not led with that, and we've been very intentional at trying not to. Now, whether we fail to stay far enough away from that or not, obviously that's a judgment call. But one thing we want to avoid is, of course, this is not in Landmark jurisdiction, right? Exactly. They did not landmark any of this, and so we certainly don't want to step into a place where we're giving Landmark a voice, if you will, on those parts of the stadium that they have chosen not to come under their controls. Obviously, so we do want to steer clear of that, and we have not had that conversation with them, simply not only because of that, but because at this stage of the game, again, we're not trying to replicate a landmark. It's not our goal. But we're in that area that you've identified where we need to be careful as to what ultimately is reflected on the back of those panels. I appreciate your insight, because I think we probably do need a little bit more process to determine that with our partners, with Brad and David and others, to determine exactly what that panel design might look like. Because what we're showing you is not, again, it's something we like, but it certainly is not a done design, if you will, where we're saying this is what we're doing. There's obviously work to be done there, and part of today is exactly what needs to be done to advance that, right? Is to have these conversations that we're having.
Yeah, I'd at least lose the slide that starts the conversation with those walls. I mean, I think that just starts you down a path. I just have a couple more quick questions for Jill. Jill, you talked about foot candles and you talked about pathway lighting. My memory, which is dim, from the campus lighting master plan, was that the recommendation in that plan was like a half foot candle for pathway lighting. And lots of people thought that was not bright enough. Do you have a recommendation for what pathway lighting, what that foot candle level should be, and that you're meeting that?
Yeah, we are going to follow on that half a foot candle. I'm sorry I didn't mention that earlier. So we are going to, it was a half a foot candle, basically at the center. We can't light a 40-foot wide path the same way that we light a 20-foot wide path. But the metric is around that half foot candle. So we are calculating to that for the circulation lighting. Whether it with either fixture type.
And then one of the knocks on the colonnades associated with the Mercer Street and the Playhouse and Exhibition Hall and all is that it's so damn bright under those colonnades that you can read a book. I'm assuming that you're going to manage that to a lower level too.
Yes, it will be. There will be more light on the contours. Are you talking about inside, Jill?
Yeah, I mean just
Inside,
under the
yeah.
colonnades.
Yeah. So the good news is that all of it will be able to be controlled so that, you know, we can make adjustments if it's feeling too bright, or maybe there wants to be more brightness during an event versus not. And I think that's really important to us in terms of addressing that flexibility. But if you know me, you know, I'm not big on overlighting things. And so we're working really carefully because we don't want people to also have the experience of leaving the stadium where it is really bright and then walking out onto campus and having it immediately feel too dark, right? Because even though it's perfectly serviceable and comfortable on those pedestrian pathways, we're trying to avoid that transition issue with too much contrast.
Right. And that's always been a problem with the colonnade along Mercer Street, is that it's so bright that when people leave that, they're not happy.
Yes.
And then the campus master plan also really does talk about destination lighting and lighting the art. So I'm glad that you've got that in there as well. I think that also echoes the rest of the campus and is a good thing. So thank you for that. And that's it for me, Michael, if you want to go to the people in the room. Unless Kate, did you want to say anything more? Did I get everything?
I think you got it, Jill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, just a couple quick questions. Are there any concerns with uplighting the canopy from a light pollution perspective? I mean, obviously the whole campus is very bright, but because that material is still kind of translucent, right? So I'm just curious if
certain parts of it are, right? A lot of it is opaque, so that light will be cut off. Not to ding the field lighting, but if you look at what causes sky glow, more than half of it is actually reflected light that's aimed downward. So when you think of like the Port of Seattle is actually the biggest contributor in the city, or street lighting actually. So I think in the context of what we're trying to do, that uplight's really important. Like I mentioned, it is controllable and flexible. And, I think overall what does escape is a pretty minor contributor to anything that's going on from a pollution standpoint.
Okay, great. And then Barbara, I really appreciate the further study on the 3rd Avenue Promenade. Thank you so much for that. I only have kind of one minor question on that. It looked like at that intersection in the southwest corner of the project, where you're kind of reusing the pavers from the fountain, there's kind of a square area that seems to kind of cut into Harrison, or I don't know if it actually cuts into Harrison, but I was just kind of curious about kind of what shaped that. Like there was sort of a block of that stuff.
You're asking about where the pavement
Yeah,
is
kind of where the pavement ends and kind of what's the logic for it.
I'm wondering if you could go to the area plan for the Southwest. This is a great question. So we've done a whole series of studies. So at Harrison, so keep going here. You're real close. You're getting close. This next sequence. So I'm gonna try and do this.
Old school.
There's sort of 2 layers of this. There are 3 layers. One is how much do you have to work with, and making sure that you take a percentage of that and figure it's going to be lost, right? So you're smart. So the next layer is really acknowledging this whole international fountain, and I'm going to say the table mat of paving it sits on, to use a metaphor. So what we're doing is we're bringing that table mat, I think it is right out in here. And then what we're doing is we're bringing it over here. And this to me is that question of how far do you bring it and how far don't you bring it? And it's really a feeling gut thing more than it is a rational thing.
Yeah.
The table mat is a more rational thing. And I believe the other extent is to approximately here. And I would acknowledge you're identifying one of those things that, and it's part of a cost discussion we're going to be having. That line is probably going to wiggle around a little bit, but that's the framework for the thinking.
No, that makes total sense. And I think that's completely the right approach to kind of
Okay.
like approach it from an experiential perspective rather than this is what it
The
looks like in
plan.
plan, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that's great. And then just one other quick question on the precast panels. Are those load bearing exterior walls now, basically?
Yeah.
So it's a sandwich concrete on the outside. concrete on the
Exactly, a
inside.
sandwich panel.
Okay, yeah. Do you anticipate kind of any sometimes when we've studied doing precast, in our region, sometimes we run into issues with, seismic connections and maintaining continuity of insulation and air barrier and all those kinds of things. So I don't know if you're far enough to have studied those or if you anticipate any problems with that, but maybe the question and just kind of heads up, like sometimes we kind of hit some pretty significant snags. I assume this is going to be like the risk category 3 building with the occupancy load. And so just kind of something that, I don't know if you looked at it, but something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think we're
Yeah,
just getting into those
just
detailed
starting conversations with the precaster. We've got them on board now, which is nice to talk through those kinds of details.
Yeah.
And our structural engineer is working directly with them too. So I haven't gotten that far yet.
Okay.
But it's something that we'll definitely keep in mind as we go through our conversations.
Yeah, the energy code, we have to have so much insulation below grade, and they really are kind of enforcing continuity of all those elements and things like that. So top of wall, bottom of wall can get hairy with those kind of precast sandwich panels. So especially
You
when
might
you're
be able
trying
to
to kind of-
lower, you might be able to lower the risk category as these are only the bathrooms and the concessions and
Right,
not the
right.
critical infrastructure. So it might actually help us that these are like outboard buildings and not really part of the
Yeah, they
stadium.
could be separate IBC buildings or whatever, but yeah, just more of a kind of heads up. And I think that's up for me.
All right. So I just had one kind of clarification of something that I'm not sure if I heard you all say. I heard, so related to lighting, did I hear something about cost challenges related to lighting mentioned? Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, cost challenges in general, we're working with Cell and our construction partner on the DD level costing exercise they're going through, and no surprise, there are always challenges. And for various reasons that we're grappling with today, unfortunately, the timing of all of this has been in the last week or so, and we've gotten some updates. So we just didn't want to show anything and wanted that we can't promise, right? So the intent is kind of what we communicated today in terms of how we want to light these canopies and color changing fixtures. But we're just working through it right now. But it's not just the lighting itself. It's a complete project, right? You always have to give and take.
I'll name it, it's a sewer.
That too,
So you heard at the beginning that Lance mentioned our most recent challenge, and this is a sewer main that travels in the vacated portion of Republican and serves a large part of Lower Queen Anne. And we are still working through the financial responsibilities of replacing that asset, which we certainly agree needs to be replaced, being 130-ish years old, constructed of a single wide of brick and 25 feet down. Needs to be a larger capacity, et cetera. So we don't disagree that this project presents a unique opportunity to address that asset. However, financial responsibility to be determined.
That's a big however, big comment.
Thanks for noticing.
I just want to make an observation. We had a conversation just before the meeting about this, and I think without speaking out of turn, I think because some of this that could sit in the private sector, the opportunities for early procurement are there. So there are some opportunities that I think as a team we're kind of digging into to figure out how we can leverage those in this particular time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, unfortunately, lighting in the technology sector is, it's a big unknown right now, so coming from overseas, so that did factor into our over budget situation.
Okay, thank you. I had one other just clarification of a question that's already been asked. So you mentioned related to the concrete precast walls, as you continue the development of the pattern on those walls, you mentioned that that is you working with stakeholders and user groups further on that pattern. Can you speak to who those stakeholder and user groups are?
It's actually a fairly recent design and development. So really, I think it's been our core team of stakeholders, mainly the ones in this room that have kind of gotten this look at it so far. But the intent is to cast a little bit of a broader net, as I think Jill was getting at, to make sure that we're getting all the critical eyes involved. And we certainly want to be respectful of that process, and don't want this to be a sore spot for anybody.
And we'll
Yeah,
certainly.
I would add in, John, that, you know, Seattle Center and David and his team are going to be a significant starting point for us. You know, we sort of look at that as something that is strongly within their purview to help us to identify what that needs, how that needs to read on their campus. So I would probably suggest that not that SPS's opinion isn't going to carry weight as well, but certainly I think in this area we'll look to Seattle Center to really help us navigate that issue.
And certainly landmark staff conversations there. Yeah, that's certainly a constituency that's important, I think. For Jill's earlier conversation, you know, our goal is not to copy Paul theory or to be too reminiscent, if you will. So that's going to be that fine line.
Great, thank you. And then just one further question as well on the Northeast student entry. And I know Brian mentioned Brian mentioned that area, and I'm curious what the kind of planting opportunities are around that area. If that's the latest and greatest rendering, if you could speak to that, Barbara, a little bit.
You know, that particular area, and I'm wondering if you can find an image of it, a plan image of it. That particular area is doing a lot of heavy lifting. So entry and to service, entry to McCall Hall, the SDOT extents. So what we've got as an opportunity is installing street trees where there's space, given all of those curb cuts, which are zero right now. I just want to be completely transparent with you guys, right? And so what we are doing, and you saw it in the rendering, is bringing vine walls around that. And I think one of the things that's going to do is it's going to, on a vertical scale, it's going to soften that whole experience and frankly almost do more than if we were grabbing ground plane. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So I think this gives you a sense of what's occurring there. And then across the street, there are the huge plane trees that are from the earlier Seattle Center, I think. So.
And I'll just add that these vine walls are shown here intentionally as part of any green factor.
We just love the green factor.
The wrestling green factor.
Bonded with green factor. I just want to deal with carbon issues.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay, two more just quick questions. So one of them is related to the sustainability elements that you were covering. Are any of those kind of visible to the public, visible to students?
Oh, I'm trying to think.
Well, I'll just jump in and say, I think solar is probably the biggest one that will be visible. I think given the type of facility that we have and those canopies, you know, solar becomes very instructive one. So, and that is certainly something we heard from students, not just sustainability, but even that idea. So,
Yeah, yeah, so the solar will be this whole roof that you see here, that will have solar on top of it. So is it visible? I'm sure it will be from some point of the stadium. I'm really excited about the opportunity to drain the roof canopies into the planting beds, and so that will be visible, and it's probably something we can play up a little bit just as a learning opportunity.
You just be slightly philosophical about this. One of the things I find interesting about this larger question is that there are things in our environment which are doing heavy lifting. And because of the way we see it, we don't see it. We don't understand it. And therefore we don't value it. And I'm saying this, Brad, because I think that there is an opportunity in terms of the educational function to help students think instead about objects which are static and instead to think about these interactive. So that's kind of a philosophical, but
it can be, can I jump in and just say from SBS's perspective and practices, every one of their major new facilities, whether it's a school or something else, we try to, and I've done a dozen schools for that, doing a couple right now, incorporating didactics and learning opportunities right there at every facility, whether it's a rain garden or whether it's solar panels. Sort of instructional tools on the site are very sort of easy, low-hanging fruit to actually employ. And we will be continuing through this partnership to work with MSR and the design team to incorporate those types of learning opportunities, as well as just like what Barb was referencing, the fact that this location is in the middle of the entire district, physically, centrally located. Nearly every student comes here by group transportation or public transportation. That type of inherent sustainability efforts to steward the environment are things that we don't have to teach the students, they're already doing it, but to call attention to it and reinforce those practices that are only going to get better with this fantastic project. I think those are some of the tools that we are committed to actually employing here. Hope that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely does. Thank you. And then the last one is just a quick clarification, and I'll pass it off to AP. You mentioned Pyramid helping with some of the Indigenous group engagement related to the fence line. Have they already done any touch points just about the desire for those Indigenous groups to work on that location?
I'm not sure if you had conversations about that. I don't think specifically on that installation, I don't think there have been conversations, but I think there have been broader conversations.
Yeah, I would step, yeah, we have not identified this yet. We haven't had that, what I'll call second round discussion. Obviously, if you recall, in our first round of discussions with the 5 groups that we spoke to, I think 4 of the 5 expressed an interest in having their cultural heritage displayed in some form, if possible, somewhere on the project. So at that point, that's really been what we've been dealing with to date, is really just their expression of interest in having some identifying opportunity on the site, but we have not taken it to the next level.
Okay, thank you, Lynn, and I'll pass it off to AP.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. And thank you, I think, specifically for being responsive to the comments with the commission and the community. I think we can really see the progression over time. I had a couple of comments. They're going to be on some of the views. I think this view shows some of it, but my first one is pretty basic, which was, I know in the earlier presentation you had shown some tensile structures. I couldn't tell in some of the views. Are those still in or are those not in?
No, we've gone away from those and really focused more on, you can see these canopies over the precast here, these little brows. On the stadium side, those become much deeper awning structures to give coverage at queuing areas. So restrooms, concession stands is where we've focused that roof cover and sort of pulled away from covering those corner sections to allow for flexibility and varied uses of those spaces. We are intending to allow for tent structures and things to be installed on an as needed basis per event with some tie downs incorporated into the paving. So yes, the tensile structures are no longer on the concourses.
Okay, great. Could you flip to, I don't know which page it is, but maybe it's up a few pages from where you are. So maybe the northeast entry gate or the south entry gate. One of those pages. Sure, this works. You know, actually, sorry, let's start somewhere else. Let's start with the west canopy first. I had questions there, and then let's come back to this one in a second. Or the Harrison Street canopy.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sure, yeah. So I know you're trying to do a lot of things in these renderings, and some of it's stylized and some of it's kind of suggesting actual materials, but could you say more about the actual materials that we're looking at? Is it painted white? Is it steel? Is it concrete? You know, just describe to me the architectural system that we're seeing.
On the canopy itself?
Yeah.
Yeah, so right now it is a steel structure, steel columns, concrete filled, I believe.
It's like a steel tube filled with concrete.
And the structure above is a tapered steel wide flange member, all painted high performance coating in white. And the sort of translucent section you see to the farthest south portion of that roof is an ETFE material that allows transparency, allows for UV to get to the landscape below, and offers cover without losing daylight in that corridor. So we think it'll help make that feel like an active, uncave-like yet covered experience.
Great. And in terms of the see-through part of the canopy, that kind of soffit there, what is that material?
These canopies are interesting because we're trying to be expressive with the major elements, these girder members that have this tapered, parabolic curved profile, but the rest of the structure here that you're seeing is really kind of, I don't want to use the term bare bones, but structurally minimal. So it's a series of hollow steel tube members, and what you will see there where Angie's pointing is steel roof decking that would be painted in the same finish as the structure.
Got it. Great. Okay, that's helpful to understand. Thank you. And so going back to then one of the your entry views, you know, I'm sure you all are aware. So I'm pointing out something you've, I'm sure, been thinking a lot about. So that's what I'm curious about is, so you have these kind of entry structures that seem to have the wood soffit that some of your corn pavilions have. The corn pavilions seem to have like a black steel kind of edging detail around the wood soffit. These seem to have like a white painted tube steel, I'm assuming, is the structure there. Obviously, the canopies are really strong architectural language with curves and round columns. These have different relationships to each other at various moments, you know, so I was curious, kind of not philosophically, but specifically, how you all had considered bringing these systems together and how they relate together, specifically thinking about the different types of columns, again, the different types of soffits, colors, materials, like how do these roof features all relate together?
Yeah, good question. We studied several options, and we actually, one of them was sort of developing a miniature canopy-like structure here. And the proportions and the scale just doesn't really translate to this pedestrian level. And we really felt like it took away from the expression of those larger canopies to try and mimic it here at a reduced footprint. So really, I think what these are more akin to are some of the covered structures you have elsewhere on campus that are minimal, they offer coverage, yet are kind of quiet architecturally. Especially on this east edge where we want to not detract from the memorial wall itself. We felt it was important to have something easily recognizable as an entry portal, but not really much beyond that.
That makes sense. So if you go to the view above this one, so in this view, we can see the canopy behind, we can see the ticketing or the kind of, how do you describe them, but the building structures, we can see this gateway portal. It looks like there's a gap between them. In the view, at least in my version, the northeast, yeah, exactly. It seems like it has a slightly different relationship. I was just curious about how you were thinking through some of those relationships as well, like how they come together.
Yeah, we do have a few instances where these structures come within a few feet of those corporate pavilions, but they really are intentionally separated so that they don't appear as an extension of those buildings and stand alone as their own element. And the placement was really largely dictated by the site grading and how we could finagle. There's a lot happening here, and I think it's a credit to the full design team and Swift specifically that the ramps and stairs and where these entries happen have all really gelled together in I think a nice way for as complex as the grading is in these areas. So that's somewhat, to some degree, dictated where these entries can happen. Barb, I don't know if that's a fair.
Yeah. Yeah, so, if you think about, here's the memorial, those entries aren't perfectly symmetrical. But again, experientially, it's gonna feel pretty good. It's not gonna feel weird.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Great. Thank you. I think that was, let me just double check my notes. I'm pretty sure that was all of my questions. I had similar thoughts as you, Zubin, about the kind of lighting the some of the more transparent elements of the canopy. Okay. So yeah, I think that's it for questions. And I know there was one online.
Yeah, and because my job is always about keeping the time, but we have about half an hour left. But Erin Doherty from Department of Neighborhoods had raised her hand, and obviously it's about the larger discussion about the walls. Erin, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Any kind of comments that you have based upon the discussion that you heard relative to the exterior walls?
Actually, that is why I raised my hand. So thank you. And I appreciate letting me offer my comments. As Michael said, I'm Erin Doherty with Department of Neighborhoods, and I coordinate the Landmarks Preservation Program. And the Landmarks Board the majority of the board members did have a first look at this yesterday, and specifically for the memorial wall work. And there's a lot more detail for them to review before coming to a final decision, but their early feedback has been very positive for the restoration that's being proposed and the increased access and trying to address people's ability to get closer to the memorial. So that's great. So I did want to offer a comment about the stadium design, but thinking about it in the context of the larger campus of Seattle Center, there are many landmarks there, including the Northwest Rooms and the International Fountain Pavilion. And I heard someone presenting refer to the precast panels as a placeholder. So I understand that they are still in development and being thought about. And I would encourage the design team to look for a language that is more distinctly different from the 1962 World's Fair design, and that Paul Theory's design of those panels and that sort of freeform geometry is very much of that era of the 60s and just kind of says mid-century. And I think you have a great opportunity here to do something that's compatible. This idea of a relief panel and concrete, it's kind of some compatibility across the whole campus. But I would recommend that you look for a design that is not as referential to the theory panel because it sort of creates a confusion about eras of buildings and what came when. And this has the opportunity to be very much of its own time here in 2020. 5 or 6, whenever that comes to fruition. And it just feels a little too literal right now and how it's being borrowing from the theory design. But I also appreciate that trying to render something is always challenging. So it's hard to know if that's texture you're trying to show or if it's pigment. And so it's a little hard to know what that'll look like. But I would encourage you to kind of explore something that's perhaps different than the theory panel itself. So, and thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate you hanging on to the call, and the comments are well placed. AP, do you want to lead us?
Yeah, sure. Great. Well, so this has been, I think, a pretty robust discussion. And so I think there were a couple of pretty clear topics that we centered around. We heard a lot about categories for discussion. So I think we heard a lot about art, both the kind of program of the art, as well as, well, we didn't really get into any of the content of the art, but specifically the placement and the funding. On the architecture, I think we had questions about some of these precast panels, also around some of the materials and elements and relationships of structures. There were comments on engagement. So I think that was both ongoing with students, which you all are well placed to do, as well as some less defined engagement with Indigenous groups or historic groups or neighborhood groups. And then, actually, I don't know if we need this as a comment. You were the only one that mentioned it, Zubin, was the continued kind of engagement with Seattle Center campus. So how does this project engage or not engage the Seattle Center campus? So those were the 4 topics I had. Did I miss anything that anyone really wanted to discuss under those broad topics? Hearing none. Maybe we could start with art then. And I believe we're not going sequentially. Yeah, go ahead, Kate or Shel.
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to jump in, and most of my comments are going to be focused on this area, though some of it bleeds a little bit into community involvement. So just forgive me for that. But my general comments are, well, first of all, just again to reiterate, super excited about this project. It's going to just make this area more of a jewel for our city. So thank you so much for all of your diligence on this project and your collaborations, and as the word has been used a lot, evolution on this design. And as we consider the design evolutions, I really just want to, my main core comments and recommendations are about finding ways to expand opportunities for art. So since we just were discussing, since Aaron was mentioning the relationship with the Paul theory wall, a little bit of background that I was just shared about Paul theory is he was from Alaska, and the imagery that is referenced in that design, again, I'm not an expert on this, but is referencing form line design, which is a native design language. And so thinking about that component of the Paul theory wall, and the fact that the project team has already been considering Indigenous collaboration for this project. One possibility I would like the project team to consider just generally is, could you have an artist involved in as a design enhancement for what that cast concrete design is? Understanding that the architects and engineers have a lot of expertise. We have a lot of great precedents of artists working with architects to develop cast concrete wall components, like Nori Sato working with LMN for the 520 light rail concrete wall. So anyways, just something that I would like the team to consider is, could, for example, an Indigenous artist work with the team to develop some simple design motif that becomes the wall treatment. So it isn't just limited to the fence that you all are considering, or more generally, could an artist be invited to be involved in that design development to fully place it into the present, as was discussed earlier, and really thinking about the contemporary branding as well as friendly treatment for this cast concrete wall. And then just a note with however you all develop your collaborations with federally, with tribes and indigenous groups for this project. On artworks, I'd like to encourage you to involve invitation to non-federally recognized tribes with this project. And then more generally, again, with the focus on expanding opportunities for art, I'll just underscore Jill's questions to encourage the Seattle Center to make the full 1% contribution, to encourage One Roof to make a voluntary 1% donation of private funds for additional art opportunities. I know you all are already considering it with the fencing, but perhaps again with design enhancements with the building face. And as part of that, I would really love to encourage One Roof and SPS, once you have, the project gets further on, to consider hire a teaching artist or community-based artist to create a program that helps coordinate and work with all the various schools to create that student-led design for the interior of the building. I really believe that it's such an exciting opportunity for student art, and you really need to have some support from a teaching artist or community-based artist to strengthen that possibility. And then my last comment is, would love to have further Seattle Design Commission involvement and review of how the proposed location of the percent for art is integrated into the public realm, as well as just more generally any other artwork that is occurring on site. So those are my lengthy comments. Thanks for your time. And again, very excited for this project.
AP, I think that Kate just gave you a fantastic list of potential ways to expand the art involvement. The only other one I would add is to ask the project to look for ways they can support the 1% art with the project budget, to pay for footings, to help with coordination, to do some other stuff like that. And I think that Kate's list is a great kind of aspirational list that should be something that we put in our recommendations.
Great. Thanks, Jill. Thanks, Kate. Other comments on art? Okay, hearing none, we're gonna keep moving. We've got about 15 minutes left, or a little longer than that, but so we're gonna keep each of these to a little less than 5 minutes so we can vote. Okay, architecture and materials. We had a lot of discussion around what has been known as the theory walls, or labeled the theory walls, but other comments on architecture or materials?
Had a few. So yeah, we've talked about the walls extensively. I think there are a couple different avenues for development there. They actually struck me as a very kind of geological form. I didn't really see them as, sort of theory inspired without having the backstory. So maybe that's kind of an avenue to push down. I think another possibility is maybe to think about the methods that the mid-century masters kind of used, and kind of use those methods to kind of interrogate the culture of today and use that to kind of inform rather than copying the form. So I think maybe just a couple ideas for exploration there. We talked, AP, you talked a lot about the entry gates and how those kind of they seemed like they were not similar enough to the canopies, and also not close enough to the pavilion buildings. So I was honestly just kind of wondering if they needed to be canopies at all. Like maybe they could just be sort of frame, like expressed frame structures or gates or something, because it's a really minimal amount of coverage that you're getting for what's going to be a huge crowd anyhow. So maybe they don't really need to be, as much of a structure at all. So that's maybe just something to think about or study.
Can I add to that one,
Yeah.
Bob, since we're kind of doing it conversationally? I'm curious, and I would be interested in your perspective, Subin, the kind of ETFE material that's being used to extend the canopies along Harrison. It feels like that's something that reaches out from the stadium, whereas these materials feel more horizontally contiguous. So I would be interested in your perspective on kind of ETFE as that extension out of the.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I would want them to stay different, I guess, if that's what you're asking. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah. I think they should be different.
Mhm.
Because I agree, like the mini canopy doesn't seem appropriate, you know? So yeah, I think they just need to be a totally different thing. Like they almost need to feel like part of the fence or something, you know, like rather than another structure sitting there.
I can offer just a partial response on the coverage notes. Really the intent here is to give coverage to the oftentimes volunteers.
Oh,
that
the
are-
attendance,
that
right?
get
Yeah,
taken.
sure. Okay.
And so, yeah, it's not meant to cover the queuing
Yeah.
necessarily, but to offer coverage for those folks that are standing there for hours at a time.
No, that's a great point. Yeah, and so maybe, you know,
Easy
maybe
if you
it's
would
like,
not actually get them in shade. So
and so maybe it's just a cantilevered form. Maybe it doesn't need to be a cantilevered form. It's just something to kind of make it either its own thing or kind of more part of the pavilion, you know, more same or more different, I guess.
And can I just add, so like I think to state the problem, not the solution, feeling like it's reaching out from the stadium and welcoming you, greeting you to the stadium, and you have the skill sets to do that. I think that's what I see as it needing, is that reaching out from the stadium component. Is that
Yeah, that
encapsulated?
makes sense.
Okay, go on.
Okay, and then we didn't talk at all about the cafe. I think that's an awesome addition. So yeah, and I think it's going to be hugely utilized because when you're out in that space, there's no amenity that you can really see. You know, like you have to kind of go to the armory or go somewhere else or leave the center to like go to a restaurant or cafe, right? So I think that's going to be hugely utilized. So I just encourage you to kind of keep thinking about how much traffic that's going to get. And I was just a little concerned about the kind of dead end guardrail. And I know there's grade change and all that, but just something to think about because I think there's going to be hundreds of people, you know, trying to get to that cafe during some events. So, but yeah, awesome addition. I think it really helps bring something to that corner, which we've all struggled with. And it's kind of this weird leftover dead end space. So yeah. That's it.
Add to architecture. I just want to note the importance of lighting to that architecture. So I just want to ask that as potential VE is coming forward, just speaking to how much the lighting is your experience of the architecture, particularly in the Pacific Northwest, where that dark happens so early, and with the relationship to the interestingly lit surrounding spaces, particularly moving to the north, understanding kind of the color and the white lighting of those spaces and how important that is to how we read the architecture in the area. I just want to put that forward. And then also just visibility of those sustainable design elements as they relate to the building and to the landscape from a teaching perspective, as you described, to encourage that.
Great.
AP, I've
Awesome.
got a couple
Any other
of-
comments on architecture? All over on that category.
I have a couple.
Brian has one.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Jill.
No, Brian, go ahead and go. I'll go after Brian.
I think it's quick. I think I really have enjoyed the attention to what the outward face side of all of this is, and be it precast or whatever solution we get to. I think we're starting to really focus on that, and I think that's hugely positive. I would say on the cafe, let's not forget that faces the opera as well. All right, like it has a side that faces the opera courtyard. And so let's not turn our back to that either. I think we've done a really good job being welcoming to the fountain side, and I think that cafe has a real opportunity to sort of connect the two. And that's it.
Great, thank you. Jill?
Yeah, I'm really glad Zubin brought up the cafe because I think he's right that that's a fantastic addition. And I applaud his enthusiasm for the hundreds of people that will be there on some days. But there's also hundreds of days like today when there's like nobody. And so one of the most important things about anything succeeding there, and I would really love to see something succeed there because other attempts have failed, is the scalability of it. That what I like is that there's a small component to it that probably can serve coffee to staff and the rare people who are there on rainy, gray days, and then it can scale up for the big events. I think that's fantastic. As far as just summing up architecture in general, it might be that because those precast walls are somewhat underdeveloped at this point in time, that we might recommend or condition a subcommittee to review that at a later date. I'm trying to figure out a way that we can see it again without slowing down or burdening the project. Although potentially if they're slowed down because of the sewer line, maybe that's not a problem. But I just wanted to throw out there that we should talk about what the mechanism is as well for how we want to move forward with that.
Thanks, Jill. That's great. Okay, I'm going to keep us moving. Engagement, were there comments or discussion on engagement?
It's just
I
a
would say
repeat.
appreciate. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Just a quick repeat of what I had said before of involving non-federally recognized tribes in any outreach around design for this project.
Great, thanks, Kate.
And Adam, I do kind of like the idea that the memorial wall is a landmark that they'll need to take and be showing to some of these historic groups, and that's an also good way to see if they come up with a exterior wall design that flies under those groups' radar. That's a good check. So I do think they should be encouraged to talk to historic groups, primarily focused on the wall.
Great.
Yep, and mine was just to, so bringing, if we do determine that a subcommittee is appropriate, so updates from the further engagement with Landmark, and then just a little bit of appreciation for the updates on kind of engagement with event planning groups. That's continuous, Barbara.
Okay. Great. Engagement going once. Okay, engagement's closed. And then, well, I've used engagement here in this one as well, but let's say the interface with the continued interface with the Seattle Center campus. So this is around site, but it's also around architecture, and I think it's also around art. So additional comments we haven't. I moved the cafe actually to this. I think the cafe is an example of engagement, both with the opera, as you were saying, Brian, as well as with certainly this project, but also the fountain. Are there other ways in which this we want to comment on the interface with the campus?
I would just really like to thank Barb for all the hard work she's done with the 360-degree integration. And, you know, I felt like the flyby was fantastic, and we didn't do a lot of talking about it because I think that she really addressed all of the issues. And so I really appreciate that.
For sure. I don't think we can understate that. Thanks, Jill. Or we say that. Yeah. Okay. So are there anything else that was not mentioned that anyone wants to comment on before we move on? Looks like Michael has something.
No.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, in summary, we'd really like to thank you for your presentation around design development. This will be, or this is currently slated, we'll see what happens, as the final time the commission looks at this. I heard so much, and I want to add to this list of what the commission appreciates. I think, first of all, we didn't talk at all, the commission didn't talk at all, but it's not exactly our role, but the mission and the student first, I think it comes through so clearly. This facility is so cool. It's so exciting to think that this will be a facility for high school students. So I think we all really appreciate the work that you all have done with a limited budget to make that happen. It just sings. I think we were just talking about this, but the integration with Seattle Center is amazing. I think that Harrison Street, which is one of the worst parts of Seattle Center, as you were mentioning, coming from the monorail, is just an awful experience. It's so much better. I think the way that it's going to engage around the fountain, it's so exciting to see. And so I think this is so necessary, and it sort of feels like a missing link that is happening. In spite of our conversation, I wanted to thank you for working hard to find local references in your materials, in your forms, in your process. I think that's coming through, and I think we have hesitations about some of them, and you've heard them. But I think in other ways, it's a delight to see bringing the language of furthering the language of the Seattle Center. And so we really appreciate that. I think we appreciate how much both the interior and the exterior, the opportunities for art, and your commitment to funding that. We mentioned the cafe and how excited we are about that, both the program and as Jill said, the scalability, and then the continued evolution that you've demonstrated through the project. So overall, I think we're really excited and happy, and want to thank you for your work. In terms of recommendations, let's start with recommendations, then I'm going to come back to conditions. I think there were a couple, and I'd like to make sure I heard them all, so I'm going to ask for input if I missed any. But in terms of recommendations, I think we'd like to encourage the Seattle Center to make the full 1% contribution. We were asking One Roof to make a voluntary 1% contribution to add to that. Let's see, I think Zubin, you had a recommendation specifically around the architectural canopies, which was, sorry, the architectural entry gateways, let's call them. Either making them more similar to some of the elements and more related, or more dissimilar and less related, so those elements, I think, can stand alone. Molly, you had a recommendation about more visibility around sustainable design elements. What other recommendations did we
Kate had
have?
some about Indigenous artists.
That's right. So I think we had recommendations around both the continued outreach and engagement, as well as involving non-federally recognized tribes in your outreach. Was there other parts of that, Kate, that I missed?
Possibly bringing an Indigenous artist into the wall discussion.
Yes.
Yep, thank you. That's a great one. Kate also mentioned a recommendation for involving a teaching artist to manage the program for these student, these interior student walls or art walls. Okay, anything else that I'm missing on recommendations?
Importance of lighting as integrated into the architectural success.
Thank you. So the continued refinement of the lighting, I think I'll put that as that. Okay.
And then maybe just studying, as Jill said, kind of studying the cafe space to make sure that it kind of functions, year round, small events, big events, daily use, so it's viable and workable.
Great.
And I promise this will be detailed in minutes. In a concise way. Thanks for the recording.
Okay, and then I think I heard one condition, but I want to confirm. Actually, I think there's maybe, well, we'll have to figure out if there's one or two conditions. So that'll be part of our discussion here. So one condition I heard was that we would request to see the continued development of these pavilion precast form, whatever that takes, whether it's a continued refinement of your existing form, or if it's a new form. We would like to see that as kind of a main element of this design that's kind of as yet unresolved. But I think that would be condition one, is we would like a subcommittee to review the final recommendation for that form work.
Can I prop that up?
Yep.
With, because of the lingering questions about whether or not Landmark Board is interested in this. Whatever that iteration becomes, either as a result of their involvement or just how the design progresses, the subcommittee is much more flexible to get to, but I think it's appropriate. That would be my only add-on.
Thank you. Are there any other conditions? Jill, I'm looking in your direction that I've missed.
I'm sorry, Michael, I didn't get that. Are you saying the subcommittee is appropriate, or a return to the full board is appropriate?
No, to the subcommittee after they've, met with the Landmark Board, after they've confirmed, that participation, in light of, I think, Kate's really interesting idea about where does the indigenous artists have a role in that implementation.
Yeah, if they do, yeah.
Okay.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay. Well, so we had a litany of recommendations, and then we had one condition. So with that, I think we'd like to bring it to a vote to the commission. And maybe we can start with those on screen. I can see Brian, you're first on the screen. So, Jill, go ahead. One more thing. You're on mute, Jill. You're still on mute.
I was voting.
Oh, you're voting. Okay.
Voting.
All right. Okay,
Silently.
so thanks, Jill.
Brian,
I vote to approve. I'm fine with this. Thank you.
thanks, Brian. And I saw an enthusiastic wave from Kate. Thank you, Kate.
Great, thanks, Kate.
And Ben had to drop off.
Okay, Ben is out. Great, and in the room, Zubin?
Yeah, vote to approve.
Great.
Vote to approve with the condition and with great appreciation for the visibility and openness of this as the next iteration of stadiums in the city.
Great. And I also vote to approve. So congratulations. You have unanimous consent from the commission on moving this forward, and we really appreciate the process and your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Michael, can I say one more thing?
I would be shocked
So I just have
and
to say
disappointed.
how wonderful this is to see this moving forward without having to work on it every single day. And to that end, I hope Jackie Kern is still there because I would really like to thank her for all of her work over the years moving this forward.
Yeah. She
Thanks.
is decked out, but you will have an opportunity to thank her in person at some point in the future, Joe. I'll make sure you're invited.
Thank you. Not that I'm fishing for an invitation or anything.
Thank you for the hard work, for the diligence, for the thoughtfulness. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
We look forward to hearing your thoughts if you think a sewer representative precast.
Well,
panels would be-
I was imagining, wouldn't it be nice if there was an unnamed transit agency that actually was coming in at the time that you needed them, but we'll save that for another day. We are at 12:31. Only a minute late, so thank you, everybody. Thanks, commissioners. Thanks, Brian, Jill, everybody, and Lance, least of all, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Let me stop the recording. I kept on thinking now.